Trump disclosing that his call last week with President Putin of Russia was not to his liking, a disappointment, saying that he discussed later with Ukraine, with Zelensky, this idea of more air defense support.
So what's the latest then from these talks between Donald Trump and President Netanyahu?
Well, really, we haven't seen terrific amounts of movement in the area where people are most focused, right? Which is on these ceasefire negotiations between Hamas and Israel. Those are going on simultaneously to what Netanyahu is doing in Washington and are happening in Doha and are kind of the main event right now. So we have seen really no progress in those talks. They ended inconclusively. Palestinian sources have told us that they think that Israel will still wants to control the flow of aid into the province, which they are not happy with, as well as some other issues that those sides have not been able to resolve. The question is, will Trump at some point start to lean on his good friend and ally Netanyahu to move these talks along? And we haven't seen evidence of that so far.
Do we know what was discussed between Netanyahu and Trump in the conversations they've had already?
Well, what we know is that there's still continues to be discussion about this plan that Trump has gotten behind of moving or encouraging some of the people in Gaza to leave, to go to other countries in the region as part of this redevelopment initiative that he's discussed with Netanyahu and talked about publicly as well. So there clearly seems to be some moving diplomacy on that front. The two men talked about that before they sat down to dinner when they spoke with reporters. Clearly, there's a discussion between the two men about where to go on Iran negotiations as well. So President Trump said that his team will be meeting with Iran in the next week or so. We don't know. Sometimes deadlines can be a little bit slippery in this White House. But if those talks do happen, it's clear that the U.S. and Israel are going to have to get on the same page about what the end result of those things are, whether it means they're going to pull back sanctions on Iran, what level of freedom they're going to be given to kind of pursue whatever they want to pursue domestically. So all of that was clearly part of these talks.
And those talks, to be clear, with Iran relate to its nuclear capability, its ability to generate, well, domestic nuclear power, as you indicate there, but concerns about it sort of building and enriching uranium. Did we get any insight into any more of the intelligence around how successful the American operation was in Iran? Because there had been some back and forth about whether or not it had fully destroyed Iranian capability.
Sure. I mean, I think the kind of best version of the intelligence we have at this point is that the blow from the United States, as well as from Israel in the days leading up to that, did set back the Iranian program. By how many months? All of those things are kind of best guesses, months or years. But what is increasingly clear is that this problem is not over. You had Trump coming out early after the attack and saying the program has been obliterated entirely and Iran wants nothing to do with this anymore. But now we've started to see that language change a little bit. Trump talking about, well, maybe it might be helpful to have a deal on paper. And you had Prime Minister Netanyahu using the language today of a tumor as it relates to Iran and kind of suggesting that you're going to need to go back and back and back over and over again to deal with that tumor over time. And so that's far from saying that this war is over and it's reached a finale.
Yeah, and that of course forms part of the conversations and the moving parts of the future of Gaza too. And it's interesting that you raise that particular sort of land deal, the Trump Riviera, because that's definitely something that's been a topic of conversation here in the UK over the last couple of days. But the personal relationship between Netanyahu and Trump is really interesting. It was quite sycophantic from the Israeli side.
Well, so there's kind of a tried and tested formula that foreign leaders use when they come to the White House, because we've had a number of visits that have been successful and a number of visits that have gone poorly. And I've been talking to diplomats from all over the world. They've kind of studied each other's playbook about what works best with Trump. How do you get a successful result from showing up in Washington and having a meeting with him. And clearly, flattery is one of the things that is constantly, a part of that playbook. And so we saw that from Prime Minister Netanyahu extending at the beginning of his meeting with Trump publicly this letter disclosing his application for Trump to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. He's not the first foreign leader who's come to the White House with that in hand. Pakistan did that very recently. So this is kind of a formulaic engagement with this president.
Yeah, and definitely something that Donald Trump has said that he is hankering after. Just moving on to talk about other topics, has Donald Trump suggested anything more about Ukraine? There's been some real concern about American weapons to Ukraine and the potential for those to be paused.
Yeah, we've seen some real movement on that in the past 24, 48 hours. Trump disclosing that his call last week with President Putin of Russia was not to his liking, a disappointment, saying that he discussed later with Ukraine, with Zelensky, this idea of more air defense support for Ukraine. He said he didn't say that he made up his mind on whether that would happen or not. But even the fact that he was discussing that. Now, again, the U.S. pulled back some of its military assistance for Ukraine, but now Trump is talking about restarting that. He mentioned that actually in the meeting with Netanyahu, that Ukraine is going to need more military aid, and that he wants to be one of the countries that's providing that. And so that's a real shift in language from the U.S. president.
And finally, tariffs. There's a lot happening this week. It is quite a confusing picture on tariffs. It seems that Donald Trump is holding back new tariffs until August, but depending on what country you're in, things could vary quite dramatically.
Yeah, I mean, this is looking a lot different from when he came out on April 2nd with these so-called Liberation Day tariffs and said, look, this is the number, we're going with it. Now it looks more like a feature in difficult negotiations, right? He's had really tough negotiations with countries like Japan to arrive at a conclusion that he's satisfied with. And so this does kind of appear to be, okay, well, it's not going to be this week, this deadline, it's going to be the beginning of August. This number, it might be the final number in terms of tariffs, but also come back to me with a counter negotiation and we'll see where it goes. So it does look now more like Trump is playing hardball in negotiations as opposed to coming in with a best and final offer.
Yeah, so these tariff rates change depending on how well those negotiations are going. We know the UK has a settled deal with the United States, but there's still not much clarity in terms of steel tariffs. Do we know anything more from the American side about where things might end up this week?
No, we don't. I mean, that's the source of the confusion for markets and for everybody, for these countries involved, is we really don't know where this is going to land. We understand from the White House that the so-called sectoral tariffs, so like pharmaceuticals, chips, these things that have computer chips, these things that have not been announced yet will not stack on top of the other tariffs. That's the current thinking. But there's still not a lot of clarity on where these things end. And as you mentioned, even in the countries where there is a so-called deal, UK, Vietnam, China, those are really kind of more sketchy kind of frameworks. And a lot of the details still have to be filled in. So even for these countries where we do have deals, we still have a lot of questions about how it's going to work.
Well, we will hopefully get some answers this week, Trevor. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.